Hi everyone, thanks for being here on this lovely warm Adelaide day where it's about 41 degrees. It is hot outside, and at this particular point in time I'm really grateful for a functioning air conditioning system. And we've got a few of those hot days ahead, I hasten to add. Today I'm going to talk about a subject, like most subjects actually, which I know absolutely nothing about. So most people who are party to my feed, who do comment, would be glad to hear that I'm at least admitting I know nothing about this particular subject. But I have endeavoured to do some inquiry, in depth, uh, lengthy, many hours spent looking at YouTube videos and reading articles and doing other things in order to understand trade. Now, it's one of these things that we kind of take for granted. We know that stuff comes into a country, we know that stuff goes out of the country. You just have to go down to your local port to see that. And I can tell you what, a lot of cars seem to come into our country according to a port down near where I live. So, yeah, we know stuff comes in and stuff goes out. But apparently, as stuff comes in and stuff goes out, there is a deficit that is created, that is an imbalance or a balance or, I don't know, maybe even something that isn't a deficit. So we can have this thing happening between countries whereby they're importing more goods than they are exporting, hence a deficit. So, and this is something that's come about, as I understand it now, since the 1970s and 80s, a time where we were busily making our own stuff. And then the Industrial Revolution kind of took a new turn, and China and Japan and Germany found that after the war they could produce their own gear. They didn't have to rely on other countries to produce it for them. And they, particularly China and Japan, discovered that they could do it cheaper than others. And capitalists, those people in the West who saw an opportunity, thought that then they could transfer their businesses to those other countries so that they could be produced cheaper and be sold back to the American people or the Australian people or whoever it might be. But they did. And as a result of that, more and more industries within those particular countries, Australia in particular, I guess, and the United States, found that they no longer needed to produce stuff themselves because it was being produced overseas and costing far less to produce. So they didn't need to. They invested their money in other countries, which actually meant that manufacturing industries in countries like the United States and Australia declined, particularly here in Australia, I hasten to add. And this has created, since the 1980s and 1990s, a deficit. So we're importing more than we are exporting. So what does that mean though? Well, it can be a good or a bad thing. I mean, tariffs themselves can be a good or a bad thing in the short term. They can make companies and countries aware that they are charging far too much for their goods, and that it makes the country in which the tariffs have been imposed, that is the US or Australia in that case, it can make them aware that they need to start producing stuff themselves. Now, the problem with that is that those countries, like US and Australia, may not be able to produce them at the same rate and at the same low cost as other countries. But they may find ways to get around that. They might find technological ways to improve their manufacturing facilities. They may find varying ways in order to make a difference. That is true, and it does encourage countries like us to make the changes that are required. But when it is used, as Trump is doing, as a tool to beat up your neighbours, then perhaps it's being misconstrued slightly. Now, I just wanted to bring up an example of a really good, I think, explanation of what a trade deficit is. And I've got it here for you. And we'll have a look at this, and it might help us to better understand what this trade thing and the deficit and surplus look like?
A trade deficit occurs when a country's imports exceed its exports for a given period of time. This means there is more coming into the country, being bought, than there is going out, being sold. As a result, the country owes more to other countries than is owed to it. Assume the small island of Yota has abundant resources. It uses them to meet almost all of its citizens' needs. It also uses its resources to build a factory to make surfboards. This is the only good that Yota exports. The one resource Yota does not have is oil, and it needs oil to generate electricity for its citizens and the surfboard factory. If Yota imports $1 million of oil in a year, but only exports $600,000 worth of surfboards, Yota will have a trade deficit of $400,000. Note that the only way for Yota to have this trade deficit is if other countries are willing to allow Yota to borrow funds to finance the $400,000 deficit. Trade deficits are not always a bad thing. For instance, without a trade deficit, Yota would not be able to keep the surfboard factory operating and its workers employed. Having a trade deficit might also inspire Yota to take positive action that would ultimately eliminate the deficit while benefiting the country. For example, Yota's government could encourage research and development in alternative energy to reduce its oil dependency.
So there we have it, an explanation, I guess, as to what it is really about. The question, though, for me, is not necessarily whether trade wars are significant or whether they're going to improve anything, because economists are kind of out on that, I believe. Some economists say there's a good thing, some others say that it's a bad thing. I think what we need to look at here is why Trump is doing this in the first place. Now, it is interesting to note that the three, and I didn't know this, so as I said, there's a lot I don't know about this, is that the three major importing countries to the US are Canada, Mexico, and China. And we can understand Canada and Mexico because they're so close. So it's obviously easy to get goods in and out of that country. But China certainly is because of the cheap labour that it does provide and the capitalists that have gone from the United States to China in order to have their goods manufactured. So I understand all of that. But Canada and Mexico in particular are massive exporters to the United States. But the way Trump is using this is not, he doesn't necessarily talk about, he has, but he doesn't emphasize the fact that this could be about bringing manufacturing or companies back to the United States, which I see as a good thing. So no argument there. The fact too remains that in order for that to happen, as a result of a trade war, there are other ways by which you could do that. You could add incentives to manufacturing organisations and so on. You could do a lot internally in order to encourage more manufacturing. You could certainly change the tax rates, I guess, for companies, which I'm sure Trump will do anyway for all his billionaire mates. Don't think that's a problem. But you could add other incentives in order to build in the United States. But the other complication is that there are so many parts, from motor car industry in particular, there are so many moving parts around the making of a car where a seat could come from Canada, an engine part could come from Mexico. And so all those things come together in order to make a motor vehicle. So it is not all that easy to be able to implement some of these plans. But the thing that disturbs me the most about Trump is that Trump has decided that he's going to do these things because he wants Canada and Mexico to take care of the fentanyl that flows across the borders, even though apparently, according to the Canadians, 1% of fentanyl does flow across the border. Don't know how much it's in Mexico, but Mexico are also doing what they can to deal with that problem from their end as well. And I believe the fentanyl use and the number has decreased in Mexico, and also the number of arrests for gangs that are distributing that have also increased. So both countries are doing their thing, around all of that. So why make it a conflictual situation such as what Trump is doing? It's hard to believe, unless Trump is just plain bullying. Maybe that's what this is all about. You know, what's this thing about Trump wanting Canada to be the 51st state, right? And is he bullying people so that he can enhance his own sense of worth and value, because the man has this deep, pitted sense of wanting to be needed and wanted and to be loved. So he's got daddy problems. But so what is it really all about? Why couldn't he just continue the situation as it exists? Already there were 10% tariffs and other tariffs on China anyway. They've been in place for years. Why not continue that? But why particularly target Mexico and China? And certainly in relation to the fentanyl problem, it is evident, it is plain that the people that have the fentanyl problem are Americans, people from the United States. That it is the United. That you've got a problem with regard to your people consuming and using drugs, not just fentanyl but other opioids. So, which was developed, incidentally, by your own drug companies, who were selling that shit to people without prescriptions or with prescriptions, but just dishing out opioids like they were confectionery. So you are responsible. So is it a way by which Trump can say we're not responsible for what's happening in terms of our own country and the fentanyl use? So let's blame somebody else for that, because I think that is actually what Trump is doing, and that's what these tariffs are about. And it's about him bullying other countries into his will. And particularly, you can't take over Mexico. That won't be happening. You can't do that to Canada. You might do that to Panama, I hasten to add, or to Greenland. So what is this conflagration of ideas in terms of taking over other countries and dominating them? I do wonder about that. But I don't think that any of that should have anything to do with tariffs. He just recognises that that's the only tool he's got to try and beat these people into submission. So I'll be interested to know what you might think about all of that. And also, obviously, I'd like to think that you could subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications, do all that you need to do around that as well. And I'd love to hear from you, incidentally. So thanks very much for being here. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.